But first, in a speech to the press club, you heard a little bit of it then. Earlier, of course, briefed out to all the main media papers, Indigenous Minister Linda Burney tried to reset the government's flailing Voice referendum campaign. In an attempt to counter the complete lack of hard detail about what the Voice would do and how the Voice would work, Burney told us what she wanted it to do. Now, it'd have to be asked, she said, to focus on health, education, employment and the housing issues of Indigenous Australians to lift their devastatingly poor life outcomes. Well, great, all of that's good, except the government has also said that the Voice is entirely independent of government. So it's pure subterfuge from Burney at the 11th hour to pretend that somehow she can in any way set the Voice's agenda. Now, we already have evidence that Burney can't dispute from activists pushing the Voice, like Professor Megan Davis, who said that the Voice couldn't be shut up. You can't shut the Voice up, says one of its architects. And even if, as a concession to the government, the Voice started on all those practical things Burney outlined today, it sure won't end there. It will swiftly get on to the main business of the Uluru Statement, which is, don't forget, treaty and the so-called Truth-Telling Commission. In other words, rewriting history, winding back the clock 200 years to restore a measure of sovereignty to so-called First Nations, with inevitably more controls and more expense over how the rest of us use our land, as we're seeing play out right now in WA's new Cultural Heritage Act. Now, I don't doubt Burney's desire to make a difference, but really, her speech raises far more questions than it answers.
As the Minister, when I meet for the first time with the Voice, I will say, bring me your ideas on how we stop our people from taking their own lives. Bring me your ideas on how to help our kids go to school and thrive. Bring me your ideas on how to make sure our mob live healthy, happy lives.
She's an Aboriginal woman who's been a professional parliamentarian, first in New South Wales, now in Canberra, for most of her adult life. But she doesn't have any ideas of her own, or even now she can't access ideas from elites that will end up forming this Voice. And what makes her think that there's any magic new ideas out there anyway, just waiting for the Voice to pick them up and run with them, rather than the unpopular but true reality that if we do want to get kids to thrive, as she says, we've got to get them to school. We've got to get them out of dysfunctional homes, away from substance abuse, sexual abuse and more, all the things we know now that have been so far reluctant, gutless about tackling. Today, Burney didn't have an answer as to why Indigenous Australians need this new, unique and special voice of their own. Yet all the other groups that also might be disadvantaged, migrants, old people, people with a disability, all of whom are arguably less represented in the parliament, don't need their own voice. And I think we know what all of these new ideas will inevitably involve. More taxpayer money, more layers of bureaucracy. And yet, despite the billions and billions, no better accountability for how your money's spent. No one out of this Voice, if it gets up, are going to take responsibility for what they advise, what works and what doesn't. But there was one really strange aspect to her speech.
It will not be distracted by three-year election cycles. It will plan for the next generation, not the next term.
All right, hang on. What does that mean? That members of the Voice won't regularly be replaced? Now, we still don't know how they're going to be chosen. The PM says they'll be elected.
As you've acknowledged, people want to understand this, right? So I'm giving you the opportunity to give that clarity.
Yes, that Voice to Parliament elects people to the national voice structure.
But that's not right. His own Voice website says they'll be selected, not elected. But however they get there, What does Burney's new statement today mean? That The Voice won't be distracted, she says, by electoral cycles. Does that mean they'll be there longer than 3 years? 5 years perhaps, 10 years, maybe for life? Or that regardless of what any political party might put up as Indigenous policy at the election, The Voice will do what it likes anyway? With polls turning, this is just getting worse and worse for the government. And Burney's heavy on emotion but light on detail speech today hasn't answered the questions that more and more reasonable Australians are asking. And look, her personal attacks, they do nothing to aid her argument either.
Do not let no campaign get away with using Trump-style politics in Australia. Its aim is to polarise. Its aim is to sow division in our society by making false claims.
There's a reality in politics, the more shrill you get, the more your argument is falling apart.